So I'm just unmuting y'all and we can chant verse 9.
Oui, allô?
I hope you have the PDFs with you. Okay. Sambandhino satornasti.
Sambandhino stornasti.
Nivritas sahajasyatu.
Nivritas sahajasyatu.
Karmakshayat prabodhacha.
Karmyakshayat prabodhacha.
Nivartate kramad ubhe.
Nivartate kramadhubhe.
Okay. So the first bond we talked about was the bond which is sahajam between the mind and the chidabhasa, the reflected consciousness. And here he says sahajasya nivritti nasti. So if you look at the word, it has to be broken. So there is sahajasya in the last part of the first line, and nivritti is also there. So it's sahajasya nivritti nasti. Means sahajasya nivritti na asti. There is no separation from the sahaja bond, from the bond which is natural, which is born out of nature. One can never separate. And what bond is this? It is the mind and chidabhasa, the mind and reflected consciousness. And therefore he says this bond can never be broken. Why? Because they are sambandhino sataha. Sambandhino sataha. So that word, the whole breakup is sambandhinaha sataha nasti nivritti. Nivritti nasti has been taken. And sataha sambandhinoha. Sataha means constant, always. Sambandhanam, sambandha is the connection. And he says sahajasya nivritti nasti. This bond can never go away. The bond between the mind and the chidabhasa, which means between the subtle body and the reflected consciousness. This bond can never be broken because sambandhino sataha. They are bound as long as they exist. This connection will exist as long as the body exists, that subtle body exists, and as long as the original consciousness exists, because the reflected consciousness will exist as long as the mirror exists, and therefore they are bound as long as they exist. Remember, in Videha Mukti, once a person has become Jivan Mukta and the physical body ends, that is called Videha Mukti. Body, the Sukshma Shariram, destroyed. And therefore this bond is destroyed only when subtle body is destroyed. As long as subtle body exists, this bond will always exist. And therefore the relationship, the connection between the subtle body and the reflected consciousness, it really is no connection. It's actually the very nature of the mirror that it should reflect. And it's a connection in a manner of speaking only, and it is inseparable. You cannot break that connection as long as the mirror exists. So the correct understanding is that this relationship, it is not possible to break as long as the mirror exists. And as long as the mirror exists, the reflected consciousness will exist, because the original consciousness is being reflected in the mirror. And sataha. Sataha means as long as they exist together. The mind and Sukshma, as long as the mind exists. As long as the Sukshma exists, the RC will continue. So the mirror exists, the reflected consciousness will be there. That's what is said. When does it go away? Reflected consciousness goes away only when the mirror goes away. Because just as reflected sunlight will disappear only when the mirror disappears, and remains only the original sunlight. In the same way, this reflected consciousness, which is Brahman or Atman, being reflected in the subtle body, that will go away only when the Sukshma Shariram disappears, which happens only when moksha takes place. It does not happen even when the world is ended. Because then, when the world is destroyed, a pralayam takes place, Sukshma Shariram continues to exist in the Karana format, in the Karana Shariram, and therefore only moksha can destroy the Sukshma Shariram. Okay. That is the first bond. What about the second bond? The first bond was between the mind and the reflected consciousness. And it was sahajam. And we just saw that this bond can never be broken as long as the mind exists, as long as the Sukshma Shariram exists. Then we said the mind and the body also has a connection. And that is born out of karma, karmajam. So the second bond is karmajam. And how long does it last? So he says, karma kshayat. So that sentence is broken. Karma kshayat, prabodhacha, nivartate, kramat ubhe. So karma kshayat. Shayam means destruction. Karma here means prarabdha karma. So the second bond, the bond between the mind and the body, which is to say, between the Sukshma Shariram and the Sthula Shariram, the bond between the subtle body and the physical body can break only when prarabdha karma has been exhausted. That's what is meant by the word karma kshaya. When the last amount of prarabdha karma for that body is exhausted, you have to supply over karma kshayat. This body-mind connection ends only when the prarabdha karma has been exhausted. Because what happens when the body dies? And therefore here you are saying that this connection between the subtle body and the physical body, it will last as long as the physical body lasts. What did we say earlier? The connection between the reflected consciousness, subtle body lasts. And here the same principle is being applied. The subtle body and the physical body connection will remain as long as the prarabdha karma remains. So karma, kshayat means exhausted. The karma kshayat is the exhaustion of prarabdha karma, which means the death of the physical body. So a special note here, even Atma Jnanam, even Jivan Mukti. Atma Jnanam means Jivan Mukti, Moksha. Even Moksha cannot break the bond between the subtle body and the physical body. Only the exhaustion of the physical body, of the prarabdha karma, which means that's a very important point to be noted. Then the third bond is what? Is between the mind and Sakshi, between the subtle body and original consciousness. So you had initially subtle body and reflected consciousness, one bond. Subtle body, physical body, another bond. Subtle body and Sakshi, the original consciousness, is the third bond. And this is broken how? Prabodhacha. Prabodha means jnanam. And this jnanam is what? The knowledge that the mind is anatman, and the Sakshi is atman, and they are different. And therefore, Prabodha, the jnanam consists of separating the mind and the Sakshi, which means separating anatma and atma, and claiming myself as Sakshi, the atma, and not as mind, the anatma. After the separation, which is done through jnanam, then you have to claim yourself as the Sakshi, as the Atma, by doing Nididhyasana. So by Prabodha, third bond is broken. And therefore he says, obey. both. By jnanam, both second and third bonds are nivartate, broken, and respectively. The kramat means respectively. So the second and third bonds because of jnanam alone. Okay. Sakshi, remember, it does not function as an action. There is no action done by Sakshi. So, normally when we say function, we think of an action. But when we come to Sakshi, the witness consciousness or the Brahman or Atman as we call it, the original consciousness, we have to constantly remind ourselves that Sakshi cannot act. The original consciousness is not capable of action. And therefore, the word function has to be understood as something happening because of the presence of the original consciousness. It is like you standing in front of the mirror. Okay. When you stand in front of the mirror, your reflection is formed in the mirror, not because of any action on your part. Even if you don't do anything, the mirror will still form a reflection of your image. An image of your body is still formed in the mirror. Whether you're dancing or whether you're keeping quiet or closing your eyes, sitting in one corner, that image is still formed in the mirror. Purely because that is the nature of the mirror. The mirror has the capacity to reflect. And that is why the mirror reflects. And the door does not reflect my image because the door doesn't have the capacity to do so. There is no question of my will being involved in the reflection of the mirror. So wherever the object has the capacity to reflect, the reflection will be formed. And this is surely due to the presence of the Sakshi, not due to any action on the part of the Sakshi. Thus, the subtle body borrows or reflects original consciousness, which means that subtle body ends up with RC. The RM subtle body has the RC, and therefore that composite entity RM plus RC is formed not because of any karma on the part of the Sakshi, but purely because of its presence. So this verse, the last verse 8 and this verse 9 are the seed for the description of samsara, which will later. I'll just unmute you all, or rather you can unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. But remember that we are talking a little bit of advanced Vedanta, so points which are being made are very subtle. We are trying to give a very subtle definition of the kinds of bonds and how they can be broken. It might be a little tough to understand, but over a period, as we complete the text, things will become clearer. So any questions?
Raviji, what was the name of the third bond between the mind and the Sakshi?
The third name meaning? Oh, you mean like Sahajam and all?
Yeah, like Sahajam, Karmajam and?
Brantijam, born out of error. Branti is an error, mistake.
Okay, Brantijam. Okay, thank you.
Brantijam.
Ravi sir. हेलो
Yeah.
यस सर हमारे कौन से टेक्स्ट में डिस्क्रिप्शन है रिलेटेड टू द प्रेजेंस ऑफ और द डिटेल्स अबाउट सटल बॉडीज
You will find it Tattva Bodha.
Okay, sir. Second question is, for the first connection, the connection between subtle body and the chit, the consciousness, does that mean once the person gets realized, or when the person gets is in the knowledge of that I am Brahman, does that mean that we are imagining the subtle body? Because the connection is broken after you have become Brahman. That's what I understood, but I have to, maybe I misunderstood it. You said for the first connection, it is broken.
No, I said mind and RC, the connection is broken only when the Sukshma Shariram is destroyed.
That is second one, right? That's the second point, that when
No,
the
that's the
physical
first
body
one.
dies.
No, that is karmajam. That is the connection between the mind and the body. But the connection between the mind and the reflected consciousness can be broken only when the mind has been destroyed, has actually come to an end,
Physical body dies.
which is on moksha only, not when physical body dies. Physical body dies, the mind is very much there. Subtle body still exists when physical body dies.
Yeah.
The connection is broken, but subtle body does not die. Subtle body dies only on moksha.
So here we are referring to subtle mind as subtle body.
Mind is subtle body, no? Manomaya kosha.
Yes,
That is part
Manomaya
of the subtle
kosha,
body.
but still, it's not the physical mind we are talking about. It's that the subtle body mind, the subtle body level.
No, there is no physical mind. Mind is at the level of the subtle body only.
Okay.
The Manomaya kosha is what you call the mind.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, so then let's look at the next verse. So we'll just chant it. I'll unmute you all and we can chant. I've unmuted you. I will chant the verse. Ahankaralaye suktau.
Ahankaralaye supto
Bhavet dehopyachetanah.
Bhavedehopyachetanah
Ahankara vikasardhah.
Ahankara vikasaragah
Swapna sarvastu jagarah.
Swapna
sarvastu jagarah.
Okay. So the author is now talking about the function of seer number 2. So in the beginning we talked about seer number 1, seer number 2, and seer number 3. So seer number 2 is the mind, and since we are discussing the mind in the last two verses, subtle body, Sukshma Shariram, the mind is being discussed. Now the author is talking about the function of this number 2 seer. So he says this mind has got 3 states of experience. Avastha, when the mind has become non-operational, and that is called sushupti. That one is when the mind is partially active. So when the mind is partially active, it's called partially active because it does not use the sense organs to experience anything. So there is no fresh recording of any experience, but it pulls out the past recordings of experiences and it projects on that basis, it projects the inner world called a dream, called swapnaha. So in this state, the sense organs are not needed because the mind is, the Sukshma physical body is at rest, it is sleeping. So the golakams are not available, and therefore the mind, though it has all the indriyas, the sense organs, the indriyas are not contacting the external world, they are turned inwards. And because they are turned inwards, the mind pulls out all the past recordings of experiences, and based on this, it projects an inner world which we call swapna, the dream. The avastha number 1, when the mind is non-operational. Then number 2 is swapna avastha, when the mind is partially active. Then the sense organs are also available. And the sense organs, if you remember, are the seer number 1. And therefore now the seer number 2, the mind, takes the support of seer number 1, the sense organs. And why is to contact the external world? And because it contacts the external world, it can start to record fresh experiences. So this is the difference between the Swapna Avastha and the Jagrata. In Jagrata, fresh experiences, and it in the Swapna, based on recorded experiences, it is projecting a completely new world. And why is this so important here? Because Avastha Trayam, it is restricted to seer number 2, to the mana, to the mind only. And the seer number 3 has no activity, no role to play. So Sakshi is Avastha Rahita, beyond the 3 avasthas. And once we understand this, we should claim Sakshi as ourselves, which is, if I claim the mind if I claim myself as the Sukshma Shariram, then I go from Avastha to Avastha with all the experiences. When I claim Sakshi as myself, I am going to a Avastha Rahitam state where there are no experiences, and that is moksha. Now look at the words. Ahamkare laye suptau bhaved dehaha api chetanaha. Break up. Ahankare laye suptau bhaved dehaha api chetanaha. So Sushupti Avastha. So in Suptau, in Sushupti Avastha, Ahankare Lay. Lay means resolved, lean over. Suptau, Ahankare Lay. In Sushupti Avastha, the Ahankara is fully resolved. Again, remember, the Ahankara here we are using not in Dharma Shastra sense. So in the Vedantic sense, the Ahankara is the Sukshma Shariram plus the reflected consciousness. Okay, so RM plus RC. The subtle body plus the consciousness reflected in it is called the Ahankara over here. And therefore he says in Supta Avastha, this Ahankara is resolved. It is not active. So Ahankara here has to be translated as subtle body plus reflected consciousness. Also, you can translate it as mana dravyam, the mind material. So the memory part is also dormant here, and therefore there is no external world or no internal world because the mind is completely dormant. And then, so that Supta Ahankare Lay, that represents the Sushupti Avastha. Then Ahankara Vikas Ardha. Vikas Ardha. Vikas here is activity. So Ardha is partial, and partial activity of Ahankara. Ahankara Vikas Ardha. This is Swapna Avastha, where memory is partially activated. The mind is partially activated, as we discussed. That is number 2. You have to supply Vikas over here. Sarva Vikas. When mind is fully activated, Sarva, fully activated, then it is Jagraha, the waking state. So full Vikas in the sense that the sense organs are also activated. The Indriyas are also activated, and they can function through the Golakams. And therefore, Sarva Vikas, everything, all the Indriyas are able to be completely functional. Means okay. Now the question is, without the body, can the mind dream? That's a question which Shastra sometimes asks. And what will be the answer to that? Because Swapna is a function of the subtle body, right? And therefore, dream. Anybody?
Couldn't get the question, Acharya ji.
The question is very
sir.
simple.
आपका
After
repeat
death, when the physical
block हो
body
रहा
is
है sir.
not there, Can sorry?
आपका वॉइस है ना बीच बीच में ब्लॉक हो जाता है, मतलब आता नहीं है, बीच में आधा क्वेश्चन सुनाई देता है,
Yeah,
आधा क्वेश्चन नहीं.
that's
हाँ, तो वो पूरा क्वेश्चन प्लीज
okay.
रिपीट कर दीजिए सर.
This is happening to your voice also. So that's because of Wi-Fi. We have to live with that. So I'm saying that this, according to this verse, the function of dreaming is a function of the subtle body, the mind. Because it is not using the physical body, it is not using the golakams. It is just digging into memory, and from the recorded experiences, it is projecting a dream world. So it doesn't need the physical body. Now, in that case, when there is no physical body, for example, and the mind is not resolved, so to say, can it dream? When your physical body, for example, is dead, and but the jiva exists because Thula Shariram plus RC is existing. Sorry, Sukshma Shariram plus RC is existing. The subtle body plus reflected consciousness is very much there. Why can it not leave? No, not have a dream? It's only a question which you should answer through logic.
सर सेंसेस तो नहीं है ना सर?
Senses
We
की
need
जरूरत
senses
किधर है?
also sometimes.
Golakam is not there,
But the
sir.
dreaming, we didn't say senses are required.
Golakam is not there, so
So Golakam is not required for dreaming. When you are in sleeping state, Sapna Avastha mein
that's
Golakam
exactly
ka
what I'm
function
saying. It's not done. Exactly. So you don't need the body, right?
You don't need the body, so why can't you dream?
So because reflected consciousness needs a body like a medium, like the mirror.
Because it's awake,
The
like it happens.
Sukshma
The
Shariram is
mind
very
is
much a mirror.
It's a mirror.
Sukshma Shariram is very much a mirror. It's a reflecting medium. If you remember Tattvavada.
I think it happens.
Sukshma Shariram is RM2, the reflecting medium.
Sir, if we say the body is avastha trayam, so that means for all three states the body is required?
No, Avastha Trayam is three states.
The mind state. For the mind.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
I think it can happen only when the Sukshma Sharira identifies with the gross one. Then only it's possible to dream.
Yes. So you have to be a jiva, full jiva, right? You have to be a jiva who is operational in this world. And therefore, according to Shastram, even though the dreams are a function of the Sukshma Shariram, unless the Sthula Shariram is present, the Sukshma Shariram cannot undertake the function of dreaming, even though the Sthula Shariram is not active in Swapna Avastha, but it needs to be present. So Jiva needs to be in a full Jiva with all the three bodies. Okay, so that's one thing. Second thing, in Pralayam, remember that Sushupti, not Sushupti Avastha, in Pralayam, after the destruction of the world, the mind continues to exist. The Sukshma Shariram continues to exist in a Sushupti-like state. It's not that, the Sukshma Shariram is separate, but we say that Sukshma Shariram exists after Pralayam, but in something called Karana Avastha, as if it's a resolved state. The Sukshma Shariram has resolved into Karana Shariram, and therefore, though Sukshma Shariram is present, it is in Karana Avastha. It is in the causal state. And if you look at the words, Ahankare Lay, when the Ahankara has been resolved, which means when the mind has become dormant, which is Sushupti Avastha, what happens? Dehaha api achetanaha. The body is insentient. The body has to borrow consciousness from the mind only, and it can borrow consciousness. When I say mind, I mean Sukshma Shariram. Sthula Shariram has to borrow consciousness from Sukshma Shariram only, and it can do that only when Sukshma Shariram is fully functional. And therefore, when Sukshma Shariram is resolved into the Karna Shariram, the physical body cannot borrow consciousness from the mind, and therefore it is as if insentient. So he says, like achetanaha. Dehaha api achetana. Okay. So this is important, and these concepts, what is death, what is life, all this has to be related in terms of these three avasthas only. So we can stop here and you can ask any questions.